Greetings, friends. It's 22 degrees, pretty warm for October 23rd. And I'm going to talk about my response to a video from Morgoth's review. Morgoth is in northern England. He's a nationalist, and you could call him part of the dissident right. The dissident right would include people like Ramsey Paul and Nick Fuentes in the US, Endeavour in Canada, Keith Woods and Morgoth in Europe. And this video from Morgoth was called Systems of Control, China's Social Credit System versus Western Political Correctness. And I filmed a video yesterday about half an hour long. I wasn't too satisfied with it, so sort of out on a bike ride today, and I thought, well, you know, maybe I can summarize some of the main points. And you see, I noticed there, when we talk about the dissident right, we mean like not conservative Inc., not the mainstream conservative, people who are concerned about demographics, they all share in common that demographics are destiny. So if you import Saudi Arabians into Japan, it doesn't matter what training they have, that will not be the same society anymore. It will be irreparably forever altered. Now, some of the differences I notice, like Americans like Ramsey Paul and Nick Fuentes, they're not quite so intellectual, but I like them more. They're more down to earth. I mean, I like Morgoth's review. I like all, I appreciate all content, but I get the sense that the Americans, I mean, they have that tradition of standing up for their rights, standing up for their freedoms. You'll see them, Nick Fuentes and especially Ramsey Paul, you'll see them talking about how the narrative we've been fed about the virus is a load of crap, and so I don't need to go into that here. I've talked about that before, but that's refreshing to see from conservative-minded people, because they're conservatives. Now, are all nationalists conservative? You would think so. I mean, you may say, oh, well, what does the term conservative even mean? Well, it means you believe in family, God, hierarchy, among other things, but that's what comes to the top of my head. When it comes to Keith Woods and Morgoth, they don't really talk about the lockdown too much. They don't really talk about the virus too much. Keith Woods even believed in the virus narrative when it first came out in March, and he was even wearing a mask in his profile picture. But I shouldn't be sour about that, but it's something you notice. You keep it, you don't forget something like that. If you notice someone doing that, that's a big signal that that maybe they're not what you thought they were. But I still tune in to see what they have to say. And so Morgoth's video was talking about how the social credit system, I don't need to summarize everything about that, but basically in China they have a credit system where you get points for doing good things, and you lose points for doing bad things like jaywalking or eating on public transit or playing music too loud. You're gonna lose points for that. And if you do good things like giving to charity, donating blood, doing community service, then you're gonna get positive points. And he was mentioning that women in China really like this system because they get an incentive to have more children. So it seems like China has switched from their one-child policy, which I learned about in university for so many years. They had the one-child policy. Now they're trying to fix the disaster that caused and get women to have families, which is a good thing, which I can sympathize with. And this is why I think nationalists like Morgoth, they are actually making I don't want to say they're pro-China, but they're appreciating a lot of what China is doing, because they're obviously fostering family growth, and they are for the Chinese people, meaning the Han Chinese people. Again, obviously they rule over the Tibetans and the Uyghurs in in Central Asia. They rule over different peoples, and the Chinese state, the Communist Party of China, is promoting the Han majority. So this is something that appeals to Western nationalists, because we're in a multicultural society where the European, Canadian, it's not much of a majority anymore, but the European majority is, you know, not given special treatment at all. We're given like back of the line treatment. So I can see how this might appeal to the nationalists, but obviously it does raise a few eyebrows, because do you really think this? I mean, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, they take care of themselves. That's who they care about the most. And if it means that they need more babies, then that's what they'll do. That doesn't mean they necessarily care about the Chinese people. It just happens to suit them for the moment. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had the one-child policy for so many years. Sun's going behind a condo here. So that's how it is this time of year. So basically, that's, you know, my main point was basically like, take it with a grain of salt. I've seen these intellectual people who make a lot of good points, but then it also raise some eyebrows here. You know, you can't really be serious that the Chinese social credit system, which they may want to import to the rest of the world, you can't be serious that's actually going to be good for your people, even if it encourages babies. That's great. But long term, thinking long term, it's going to emasculate you even more than you're already emasculated. And it should be a red flag that Chinese women are cheering this thing, because they get discounts if they buy diapers or, you know, products for children. They get tax credits or whatever. You know, they have a financial incentive there. That in itself is okay, but it comes as part of this whole system, which means more surveillance, total control, total surveillance. Like if you're not wearing a motorcycle helmet at an intersection, there'll be a drone overhead of you, and I've seen a video of this, you know, shaming you to put on your helmet. And this is what's happening. It's about shaming, and they will put your public face up on notice boards for everyone to see. So it's a culture of shame. It's going to emasculate people, and that's not good for your people. That's not good. It's a red flag if the women are cheering this thing. Not that I'm against, you know, social programs for women. I just think that if that's the main segment of your population that loves this thing, at least that was what Morgoth was saying. He was saying the Chinese women really like it. I'm sure there's other people who like it too. Bureaucrats probably like it. But I mean, that's a red flag. I don't think that's going to be good for your people overall, even if it boosts the number of babies you have. He contrasts the control in China, which is up front. You know the Chinese state is prohibiting you from traveling, or is you know, oppressing you in so many ways. It's up front. That's more, in a way, I guess, honest, whereas in the West, it's political correctness. They don't have that sense of political correctness in China. In the West, someone makes sure that you are cut off from your PayPal, or maybe even cut off from your bank account, or, you know, your YouTube channel is deleted, and you never actually know who's responsible for it. It could be the corporation, it could be someone else. It's nebulous. George Soros doesn't like what Xi Jinping is doing with the social credit system. Morgoth pointed this out. And in the end, he concludes that there's just as much control in the West as there is in China. It just takes a different form. Whereas, like I've mentioned in the past, the king, the monarch, he's up front, he's in control. And that's more honest, rather than where you live in a democracy where you think you have power, you vote for people, but really the people with the money just buy off the politicians, and so it's like you're losing out. But he concludes that the control is about the same in the West. I don't know about that. I mean, I think the Chinese still live under a heck of a lot more surveillance and control than we do in the West, at least for now. So that raised my eyebrow a little bit. I mean, yes, it's quite bad in the West, but I don't exactly think that it's just on the same level as China, just a different form. I think China is genuinely a suppressed society, and they don't exactly invent things. They improve on what we've invented. So China is a good example of an atheistic, like nationalism without God. I think you can have nationalism with God. It just means you put God at the top of the hierarchy, and then you have the king, and then the king's people, and then the family, and the head of the family is the man, and then the wife, and then the kids, and then the animals. Right? So in China, they have some Confucianism, they have some sense of hierarchy and a lot of good traditions, but they don't quite have that sense of God. In fact, Buddhism doesn't really have a sense of God. I mean, it's not all Buddhist over there. There's Taoism. There is no real particular religion to China, but I wouldn't exactly call it atheist. It's just kind of fuzzy. They have some Christians over there, but from what I understand, it's a minority of the population. It's a small minority, and they are persecuted. They are sometimes beaten. The state regards the Christian church as a threat. But anyways, I just think it's a good example of nationalism without God. And now you see, and Morgoth admitted, he said, I mean, I'm not trying to say that Morgoth is celebrating the social credit system. He admitted himself that it was spiritually empty, because it's all resorting to coercion. Well, we're just going to have to coerce you, and you can't force people to do good things. If you want people to do good things, you need that spiritual foundation, that people have to want to make their world a better place. They have to want to do good things for their fellow group, their fellow people in their culture. You can't force that. However, he does seem to be giving it kind of a green light. I could be wrong, but that was sort of the impression I get. There is this sort of appreciation of this monster, which is not the Chinese people, but how China is going about doing things, how the state is going about managing its people right now. It's a little unsettling to me, because Morgoth was saying, well, the social credit system, it's not just to suppress the spirit. It's not just that it's supposed to suppress the spirit of the Chinese people in this Orwellian sense. These are his words. He's saying that it was for a logic, for a reason, and that reason is to clamp down on petty crime, because there's a lot of criminality in China. We think of it as orderly and controlled, but actually there's plenty of obviously there's corruption in government, but outside of government there's plenty of criminal gangs, drug gangs, and all sorts of stuff going on. But he didn't give any good reasons why that's not a good reason. That's not a real function. Clamping down on jaywalking, and maybe the drug gangs, maybe really serious stuff, okay, but most of this stuff is being used for, the social credit system, it's being used to clamp down on the most mundane offenses, things which are going to emasculate further your society. And this is already a society where, and of course, I have a lot of respect for Chinese people, for their traditions, but let's just be honest. The Han people, they've been civilized for a very long time. They've been in cities, maybe not all of them, but they're an ancient culture, kind of like ancient India. And they get invaded like ancient India, like the Dravidians were invaded by the Indo-Aryans in India some thousands of years ago, or whenever it was, 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. And then the Han, they get invaded from Central Asia, whether it's the Manchurians or the Mongols. Those are related peoples. But the basic idea is that you get invaded by more nomadic people who are more masculine than you. And I'm not blaming anyone. When you have a civilized urban society for a long time, the men start to become more effeminate. And they probably don't eat as much meat as they would if they were nomadic, because they don't have access to the meat as much. And so now it's that situation just being exacerbated. Now I could be wrong. I have a lot of respect for Chinese people, but that is an issue they're going to have to deal with, because look at Japan. They have this problem already. Now Japan and China. One last point I would say is, look at Japan. The young people there are not hoping to make more money than their parents did. In China, the young people can expect to make much more money than their parents did. So they're still on the upswing. The economic growth is slowing down, but they're still growing economically. So there's all that optimism there. It's not going to last for more than a few decades. It's going to slow down. And we hear about all this critique of capitalism from the nationalists like Morgoth, like Keith Woods, how capitalism is spiritually empty. And that, of course, I would just say, well, obviously that's the same problem in China. China's just more ahead of the growth curve right now, or they're more behind on the growth curve. And they're never going to achieve a standard of living like was normal in the United States in the 1950s, because there's just too many Chinese. It would never happen. But they are certainly, they all have benefited. I won't deny that you know, the average Chinese is better off than they were, you know, 60 years ago, or even much better off than they were under Chairman Mao. So that's basically what I had to say. You know, kind of disjointed thoughts, but sometimes I you know, when I watch people like Ramsey Paul, Nick Fuentes, they're not so intellectual. They're more down to earth. I'm not saying I trust Nick Fuentes 100%. He's a bit of a showman, but I like his message. I like his personality. When it comes to Morgoth, Keith Woods, and you know, Morgoth is more of a total racial purist. Keith Woods, I'm not really sure what he thinks about this, but they flirt with more of these interesting ideas, which I give them credit for. But just, you know, be a little careful. Take it with a grain of salt. That's what I would say to them. That's what I would say to people who watch them. You know, just because I don't know what they think about God. I don't know what they think about all that stuff. And I think you need that foundation to make nationalism work. And if you're talking about what's good for your people, Morgoth thinks that China is working in the best, like the Chinese state is working in the best interest of the Chinese people. Yes, he can make that argument, but you can also make the other case that they are just producing an even more enslaved people than they ever were. This will just lead to more emasculation. And when has China fought a war against any Western country? I mean, I know we're living in an age of big nuclear missiles, but if they were in a war, like when was the last, they haven't fought a war since their civil, like a big war, since maybe the Korean War or their Civil War. How would they even perform in that situation today? I'm not trying to disrespect the Chinese people. I'm just asking a question which I think needs to be asked. Hasta luego, amigos.